Good morning, everybody. We're talking Zimbabwe elections. Stay tuned.
Zambia Blog Talk Radio.
The Organization of Zambians Abroad invites you to attend the Oza Zambia Independence event on Saturday, 28th of October, 2023 at Rivers Casino, 3000 South River Road, Des Plaines, Illinois 60018 in the greater metropolis of Chicago. This will take place from 7 p.m. to 2 a.m. Tickets are going at $120 online, featuring free dinner and cash bar. For more info, call Siddiq Gello on 678-851-6601. Let's get together and party.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. It is September 16th, 2023, and we do appreciate you joining us from wherever you are tuning in. Tag a friend. Let everybody know that ZBTR is live. Like us and follow us on YouTube, ZBTR TV, and on Facebook, we are Zambia Blog Talk Radio. Okay, Zimbabwe, our brothers, our neighbors in the south, held elections on August 23rd. And we also, this thing went viral on social media, in the news, broadcast, everything, everywhere. After the SADC representative made their report concerning what they had observed, according to how these things work, it created a feud between the Zimbabwe ruling party and the SADC representatives. Today, we are going to try to look at the Zimbabwe elections and many other factors and things that happened during that period. And we hope that you are going to join our conversation as we have some wonderful friends and brothers from Zimbabwe joining us for this discussion, okay? Let me welcome my first guest here, Anotida Chikumbu, political historian. He's also a PhD student and a professor, I believe, at Massachusetts Amherst. Is that how you? University of Massachusetts at Amherst. Anotida, welcome.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nkama. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes, I can. It's good to have you back on the show. The last time you came on was when we were doing the phone in, right?
Oh yes. I remember coming to Zambia Blog Talk Radio sometime. It should be in 2019 or 2020, if I remember well. And I enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to a good discussion as well today.
Excellent. We have our colleague, representative of the ruling party, ZANU-PF, who is, I don't know what has happened, he's in here, and Tafadzwa is trying to connect. Let's see how that goes, if he manages to come in, and then we can continue our discussion with him. Anotida, this discussion, the SADC, the SADC and the Zimbabwean government ruling party, it created a storm in the media. But first of all, before we go there, I want Tafadza to come in because he's a ZANU representative. I want you to speak to some of these issues to do with election mission monitors and observers. Doesn't, Anotida, the whole process or idea of having election monitors, observers, undermine the electoral system of a country in particular in Africa? Let's speak in African terms here. I don't know what your view on that is.
So I don't think that it undermines the electoral system of any particular country on the African context or in the African context in any way, because the process of election observation itself, it actually consolidates democracy.
Okay.
And that can only be understood if we trace the history of election observation missions on the African continent. And that's a very important point to note and to look into. So you will actually realize that the origins of election observation missions are rooted in the history of the end of the Second World War, the coming in of the Cold War, the establishment of these economic structural adjustment programs, and so forth. But I can just briefly explain how it came into play and how much it consolidates democracy or electoral practices on the African context.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So when the Second World War ended in 1945, one of the most important results that the war brought about was the establishment of the United Nations.
Yes.
And in 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Those were the most important achievements that came out of the Second World War. So as a result of that, you realize that the decolonization movement did actually come into play as a result of the Second World War, because part of what was agreed at the founding values of the United Nations was that the organization should promote the independence of colonized nations. So that was one of the most important values that was set up when the United Nations was formed.
Okay.
So if you realize, if you then go back into history, you realize that after the war ended, many African countries were still under colonial rule. They were still under British and French colonial rule. So most of them were trying to get independence by violent means. Some of them were trying to get independence by negotiations, by demonstrations, and different sorts of things. So there was a very big debate as to how independence is supposed to be achieved or attained by these African countries, because the United Nations, having been established, it had founding values that are rooted on the Declaration of Human Rights. So having a democratically elected government was one of the principal tenets that was required for a country to become a member state of the United Nations.
Okay.
So now, as African countries were fighting to gain liberation or to gain independence, we will actually see that they were reporting to the United Nations to say, there is no democracy in our country. We have a white minority government, so we want free and fair elections to be held under the observation of an international institution like the United Nations. This is why you see that we had the first election observer mission to be sent was the one that went to Korea to go and monitor the elections that were held in 1948.
Okay.
The other country that comes again is Togo, that comes in 1956. But these were countries that were under the trusteeship program of the United Nations. So this explains how the election observation mission comes into play on the African continent. And with the attainment of independence of so many African countries, that's how the UN started to send people that came in as election observers, and that's how language like free and fair elections started
coming up.
Exactly. But
sorry to cut you short there, Anotida. The contention I have with this is, I appreciate the historical background that you have given to this. It's very valuable, and I'm sure those watching and listening are getting some information, and they're like, oh, okay, that's where it comes from. But you notice one trend here. Maybe we can address this right here, right now. You notice that this trend is only in Africa. Okay, you've mentioned Korea. But I wonder, when the Koreans have elections now, do they have election monitors?
Oh, yes. So when the Koreans have elections, or even when Europeans have elections,
and Americans have elections,
do
we have election monitors?
They have election monitors, but not from Africa.
Why not?
But not from Africa. The problem is there are actually lots of reasons that explain why that happens. Part of it is because these nations feel at most times that they are way much mature democracies to have their elections be observed by less mature or inferior kind of democracies. Because if you see the way elections are conducted in the context of the United States or most of these first world countries, much of it is high-tech kind of like engagement. Like there's online registration, online voting, postal voting, all sorts of sophisticated kind of electoral practices, which are not yet in practice on the African continent today. So this is what sometimes discredits African countries or the African Union to legitimately say it has a right to go and observe elections or to apply to observe in Europe, in America, or in Asia. So that's one of the reasons. But again, the other is obviously that these nations are mostly bully type of nations who just don't want to accommodate other countries which they perceive to be inferior type of countries. So that is the biggest problem that we have, and that's why you see there's no single African country that goes to observe elections in Europe. There is no single African country that goes to observe elections in America and declare them null and void because they are not free and fair. That never happens. But they come to Africa to observe ours and they declare ours not free and not fair.
So you see now, back to my first question, Anotida, back to my first question. You see where I came from when I used the undermine the electoral process of that country. I understand the primary objective these electoral missions, observer missions were established were actually to enhance or to support the actual democratic process of the electoral processes across the world. But I see two different types of observer missions here. The ones that come into Africa and those that do observer missions in the so-called Western countries. I've never seen, you told me when we're talking behind the scenes, I asked you, I said, does America have observer missions to come and look at the elections? You told me, yes, they do, the G5 and the G20. They do come and observe elections. But I've never heard them hold a press conference to give their view on how the election went.
That's true. That's very true, actually. And when we break it down, getting back to the idea that I was trying to advance of how it consolidates democracy. So we must also understand that we have two groups of observer missions. We have international observer missions and we have regional observer missions, which are sometimes we say local, but we actually have three in actual fact: international, regional, and then local observer missions. So the local ones are the NGOs that exist in a country that might be interested in observing an election. The regional ones are those institutions like SADC, institutions like ECOWAS, institutions like the EAC, COMESA. They can be interested in observing the election of a fellow African country which is within the region. But a bigger problem now starts when we begin to engage the international observer missions, because those are the ones that come with ulterior motives and with an interventionist kind of motive. And sometimes they also influence these regional electoral bodies that we are talking about, and even local observers. So that is the very big challenge that we have. So the point now is the idea of having observers is not wrong. The idea of having observers.
So all the three categories have the same objective.
Have the same objective. Yeah.
It doesn't appear so.
It doesn't appear so. On paper, it's obvious that they are here to observe. They are here to see if things are going free and fair. But because they come with different motives, the conduct becomes wrong. The conduct becomes bad.
Okay, so you are in Massachusetts. You are at University of Massachusetts, Amherst. You went to Zimbabwe in July, and the election was held on August 23rd. How much going around did you do? What did you see? What did you observe?
So I did see quite a number of things about the elections. I initially just went in. I'm going to do my fieldwork research for my dissertation, but at the same time, I'm also
so it was part of your
my
school project.
Exactly, of my school project. So now I'm moving around the country. There's a point where I started to then move around to just see the atmosphere, the preparedness of the people, the preparedness of the Electoral Commission itself to conduct and preside over an election, including political parties themselves, their capacity and potential to pull support from different people. So I saw that in most urban centers, the opposition had so much support from young people who mostly want to find employment, like formal employment. So most of the rallies that were held by the opposition, they had lots and lots of young people attending them and supporting the opposition. And that was a trend in almost every urban town, if I can say. It was packed, especially the stadiums. But one big problem I then noticed was I would also talk to people like one-on-one, the people that attended the rallies. If I talk to them, I would ask them the question that, did you register? Are you a registered voter? So some of them would say yes. If I see maybe 10 people, 6 of them would say I'm registered, and 4 of them would say I didn't. But then I would ask, like, why do you then come to this rally and show solidarity and support, yet in the end you don't do the ultimate thing that is supposed to be done by somebody who is politically engaged? And they say, no, we don't have confidence in the Electoral Commission. The elections are just going to be rigged, but we are here to show this guy that we support him. And then I was like, no, the support then is not enough. It's rather better not to come to a rally and go to vote, because that's a big problem. So I noticed that it's not every single person, especially among young people, who goes to a rally who eventually casts a ballot on election day. Some of them are just demotivated and they don't. Then in the rural areas, I saw that most of them, this might be controversial, but I saw that most of them legitimately and strongly support the ruling party for various reasons, obviously.
Isn't that almost a trend everywhere?
It's almost a trend
across Africa. I mean,
it's almost a trend everywhere. And the reason why it's so is because the ruling party in almost many African countries, but I'll speak in this context for Zimbabwe.
Zimbabwe, yeah.
It actually found a way to exercise what we call neo-patrimonialism, a situation whereby they use resources of the state, they use food, they use access to all sorts of opportunities to control and to seek the loyalty of that population.
Okay.
So because these people are living a life that is so sometimes isolated, they don't have access to so many things that people in the urban towns have. They'll just use the advantage that the member of parliament there has access to them. He will provide them to each individual who shows loyalty to the party and loyalty to his leadership.
Yeah.
So that is the kind of world that they are living, to such an extent that the MP in that constituency is like they worship him. He is the provider of food, is the provider of everything they need. So in return, they just worship him by giving him a vote. So the votes in those areas, the opposition in those areas find it very hard to penetrate, because there is that working relationship and the state always has advantage because it's in government.
Okay, my other question to you is, how much campaigning, you've talked about stadiums being packed and everything, how much campaigning and how far wide did the opposition go? Was the playing field, 3 questions in one? Do you think they were free to campaign as they wished? They went everywhere?
I would say yes and no, because the president of the opposition, the main opposition party, the Triple C, was able to conduct rallies across 10 provinces. We have 10 provinces in Zimbabwe. So he was able to conduct rallies in all the 10 provinces, particularly going to the capital centers of those provinces. But he wasn't able to go into ZANU-PF strongholds, particularly in the rural areas.
Why?
Because people, they were organized to demonstrate against him or to block him from conducting those campaigns. And in some instances, the police wouldn't just approve.
Typical African situation.
The typical African thing. Yeah, I actually remember an incident in Marondera, where I come from, and it's actually an urban center. The opposition was supposed to have a rally on a Saturday. And the morning of that Saturday, the police was all over the stadium.
The
venue. And when the opposition members arrived to organize themselves, the police said, "You're not allowed to do your rally here because we are anticipating that there might be violence." And there was no evidence of any violence or any potential violence that was about to occur, but they were blocked. So the election environment itself, I wouldn't say that it was free and it was fair because of that disparity. The electoral laws themselves, Chapter 7 of the Constitution, clearly stipulates that political parties must be given an equal opportunity to access people and to spread out their manifestos, their messages, and so forth. So the moment the state blocks that, it begins to violate those electoral laws that give credibility to an election.
Weren't those some of the things SADC raised or pointed out?
These are exactly the things that SADC raised. And I was going to say, basically, the work of election observers in Zimbabwe is governed by two legislations. It's governed by the Constitution of Zimbabwe, Chapter 7 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe, and then the Electoral Act, chapters from Section 40G to 40J of the Electoral Act of Zimbabwe stipulates the functions of electoral observers, how they are accredited and how they must do their work. So it wasn't wrong for SADC to say that the election was not free and fair because political parties didn't have access to campaigning or to access to media equally. It wasn't wrong for SADC to say that the election was not free and fair because the ballot paper was in shortage in opposition strongholds in the urban areas. It wasn't wrong for them to say that, because when they look at the code of conduct, when they look at the Electoral Act, the sections that I've just told you about, 40G up to 40J, it provides them their functions, what they are supposed to do, and I'll tell you what they are. It's just basically three things. Any observer missions that come to Zimbabwe is supposed to just do three things: to monitor the voting process, to monitor the counting process, and to monitor the collation of results. Those are the three main important things that any election observer mission is supposed to do. And in the event that it notices or observes an irregularity in terms of the conduct of these three things, it's number 4 supposed to report to the Electoral Commission that it noticed and observed an irregularity. So this is what an election observer mission does. So that is exactly what SADC did. It went to Zimbabwe, monitored the voting process, the counting process, the collation of results, and then it reported to the commission. But
they did report to the commission.
They did report to both the commission and to the world, because remember the report that SADC submits to the commission, or the irregularities that they point out to the commission, it's not supposed to be secret.
No,
because they observed it in public, so they are supposed to also make them public.
So when you say public, that's when they were holding those press conferences, yes, right?
That's exactly when you hold press conferences.
And what I remember is there's one video clip I wanted to play here. It's not just SADC doesn't hold its own press conference. All the observer missions held one press conference, right?
Yeah.
I think that's what happened. AU, SADC, is it the African Observer Missions? I think they did hold one press conference together, a joint press conference.
Yes.
Okay, for those who are watching, we have Mr. Tafwaza Shoko here, a ZANU-PF representative, is a political advisor. He is, when we were doing this behind the scenes before the show, everything was good. Now, Mr. Shoko is able to watch and see, but I don't know what has happened. Mr. Shoko, just log in the way we did it at before we came live, and because there are some things that only you can address here as a ZANU-PF. I don't. Anotida cannot talk about ZANU-PF issues. Please try to do what we did before we went live, and just log off with the device that is showing here that you're on, and try to log on, because there are some important things that would like you to respond to from the ruling party point of view. So, Anotida, before we take a commercial break here, it's interesting what you said to me. I like the points you are making here about the mission according to the Constitution of Zimbabwe, right?
Yes.
Voting process, counting process, and collection of results. Then the fourth point is report to the commission what they have observed. Okay. It's still taking me back to the point where Shoko is supposed to. The next question is not for you; it's for ZANU-PF. It's so I don't know. Let me see. Okay, what there were many electoral, what do you call it? Election observer missions.
Oh yes, yes.
There were many. I don't even. Do you know how many there were?
I'm not so sure, but I understand the EU was there, the African Union was there, SADC was there, the Commonwealth was there, COMESA was there.
5 so far.
And with these are probably, we can say, regional and international, but there were a lot of local observer missions.
There were a lot, okay.
Yeah.
Did the local observer missions make a statement, a public statement?
So there is a local observer mission that's called the Zimbabwe Electoral Support Network, which had 40 of its members arrested on the day of elections. And it also had its offices were raided on the day of elections, probably because it was coming out with different results, different reports as to the process of the election. So that's one serious case that I know about of some serious suppression of an independent local election observer mission. Yeah, that's one serious case. I'm not sure if it has given a public statement yet about what went on with all of that, but that's what happened. But others that also participated,
have they been released from
yeah, they were released. They were actually released.
Okay, all 40 of them.
All 40 of them, yeah, but they had been arrested on polling day. Yeah.
Generally, Tafwaza, we're waiting on you. This is, I mean, you only you can respond to the questions that I have for ZANU-PF. And overall, almost all the observer missions gave the same report. Almost. I'm saying almost.
Yeah, almost. Okay. Yeah. The most damning one was from SADC, but almost every election observer mission gave a report that pointed out to some of the irregularities that we've been talking about.
Now, when you say the most damning one, what do you mean?
When I say the most damning one, is because SADC got to a point where they were like, the whole process was flawed, it was not free, and it was not fair. And their judgment was pushing towards the idea that the irregularities within the electoral process are grave enough to discredit the credibility of the election outcome itself. So that,
basically, so I think, is that what annoyed the leaders?
So that is what annoys the ruling party and more importantly ZANU-PF, because it was declared the winner.
What was the general response of the citizens? Let's put the politicians away. How did the citizens feel about the report? I don't know if you're able to speak to that.
So, yeah, the citizens did actually feel that it's hard to answer for everyone, but
I know, because
yeah.
let me, before you respond, because I saw something on social media where somebody was saying SADC shouldn't lecture us about our constitution. What was that about? The constitution part of it.
So that's a very important question. And I think I can answer it this way. So when they are saying that SADC cannot lecture us, I think that's Chris Mutswangwa who said that. Like the spokesperson for ZANU-PF.
For ZANU-PF. Yeah.
So he said like, SADC cannot lecture us about our constitution, which is very true. SADC does not have that right to tell Zimbabweans what is supposed to get into their constitution. That's not their mandate. It's very true. But here's what needs to be understood in as much as the work of election observers is concerned. There is no way on the face of this earth an election observer mission is going to come into a country and operate without knowing the laws that are applicable to the work that they are doing. Because remember, an election is a rule-bound process. It's a process that is governed by laws that are applicable to it, to that election. So now, if an election observer comes and applies to observe an election, any person who comes, any organization applies to the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission to have itself accredited to observe that election. And it goes through a process. It goes through an accreditation committee that passes that you are fit enough to observe. And when they say you are fit enough to observe, they give you what is called an electoral code of conduct, which is a set of rules. A set of rules that are coming from Chapter 7 of the Constitution and that are coming from sections 40G and 40J of the Electoral Act. And those are the ones that stipulate that now that you have been accredited to be an election observer, you are, number one, supposed to monitor the voting process. Number two, monitor the counting process. Number three, monitor the collation of results. And in the event that you find an irregularity of the conduct of these three processes, please report it to the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission. That is what the Code of Conduct says. So when SADC then comes to say, what we saw on the ground is not consistent with the rules that you gave us, the Constitution of Zimbabwe and the Electoral Act, it's not wrong for them to do that. They are not interrogating the Constitution. They are not lecturing Zimbabweans about our own Constitution. They are just saying that your conduct and what your laws say are inconsistent. So you must address that. But because probably it's an uncomfortable message or truth for those that are in power and those that are declared winners, it may be shot down and all sorts of theories come into play.
But Anotida, this was not the first time that SADC is doing this. I was looking at you. I'm sure you remember this, everybody watching. Late President Robert Mugabe reacted the same way.
Oh,
I'm saying this is not the first time SADC has done this.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So you see, the only thing is that the difference between then, the last election, the election in which Robert Mugabe reacted or responded the same way, and the reaction this time, there's one major difference. There is one major difference. The major difference is that this time, this thing is coming out more like a personal matter between, you know what I'm trying to say?
Oh, yeah.
It's coming out more like a personal matter between, what do you call it? Between the the ZANU-PF spokesperson and what do you call it? And what's the word? And the SADC Electoral Mission representative, Dr. Mumba. It's more of a personal matter. Yes. Okay, let's just watch this. Let's just watch this.
So I want to emphasize that point, that we are dismissive of the ramblings and mouthings of Nevas Mumba, who abuses his fiducial role as the head of the Zimbabwe-Sadc Observer Mission and arrogates to himself a dictatorial mandate as a solo individual to say, I'm here to promote the interests of a fellow preacher. He's a preacher, I'm told. He probably used to come and compare the Bible notes with Chamisa, maybe. He's a preacher. So their camaraderie in the gospel of Christ has nothing to do with his role as an observer of the Zimbabwe elections. We await the outcome of the elections. I will not...
Just stop it right there. Mm-hmm. Okay, you heard what he said there.
Oh, yes, yes.
So I didn't even know that. I presume Chamisa is a preacher as well.
Oh, yes, that's true. That's true.
So he takes it that Dr. Mumba is siding with, what you call it, with Chamisa here. Mm-hmm. Okay, that comes out, that doesn't come out, first of all, number one, Mr. Shoko, please log in. That doesn't come out more like a dismissive reaction or response to a report. It comes out more like a personal attack on this particular person. In this case, we're talking about the head of the SADC Observer Mission by the name of Dr. Nevas Mumba. Mm-hmm. That's the way that has come out.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Because you see, when you go into details like he's a preacher, we know that he's a preacher. Mm-hmm. That was personal. It wasn't an official statement. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the impression that he intends to create by that message, if you look at it, is that what Nevas Mumba is saying about the election in Zimbabwe is not the official position of SADC.
Yes,
that's an important point he was trying to make in that statement, which is not true. Because if Nevas Mumba was giving his own opinion of the election in Zimbabwe, SADC should have given through its secretariat an official notice that can be published to everybody to see that it is distancing itself from the message and from the public announcements that have been made by the chair of the Election Observer Mission, Nevas Mumba. But it didn't do that, which means that the secretariat itself, SADC as an institution, it was associating itself with the message that Dr. Nevas Mumba gave. But now, when it's politically uncomfortable to take, things can actually degenerate to go the route that you've actually seen on that video. And that is a very common trend on the Zimbabwean scene. But more important, it shows us the division that is within SADC itself. It shows us how much weak of a regional body we are. Because
isn't that typical of African or African whatever?
That's very typical even of the African Union itself.
Yeah.
I'll just give you a small example to say, just immediately after the elections ended, Dr. Nevas Mumba made an announcement that discredited and denounced the results. The next morning, SADC heads of state who are signatory members to the organization begin to send congratulatory messages to the winner of the election. So it shows us that there isn't any serious communication that is going on in the region. Because if SADC was saying that message, then before any president congratulates the winner or anything, they must be able to go and confront the secretariat and say, what's going on? We hear that there is this report. We are about to celebrate and congratulate this guy. Should we go ahead? And there isn't any deliberation. So that shows you how weak SADC is. So we are never going to expect SADC to do any serious job when elections are held in South Africa next year, or when elections are held in Zambia, whenever you're going to have them in Zambia. We are never going to take SADC seriously.
2026.
Yeah, because if you are a serious organization, treat each and every country the same way. The crisis in Zimbabwe is a crisis for everyone.
Yeah.
So treat Zimbabwe, give it a priority, act effectively to its situations. So that breaks down the whole fundamental point of having a regional body that promotes and consolidates democracy.
Because I understand that South Africa did send an observer mission into Zimbabwe, right?
Oh, yes, it did. And that was the ANC observer mission.
Okay.
It's a political party. Yes, it's a political part of another country that is sending its own observer mission to go.
And they said?
And they reported that it was free, fair, and credible.
Interesting, eh? Because the ANC, everybody should understand that the ANC made a statement that, what do you call it? The Western world is trying to put a puppet into power in Zimbabwe. Did you see that?
Yes, I saw that statement was made by the Secretary General of the ANC. His name is Fikile Mbalula. Yeah.
So, okay, Anotida, let's talk about this. Let's talk about this same point we have raised here. I've asked a friend to help Ushoko to sort out his technical issues. Okay. One of the issues that we have, this was not part of the script. I think it also speaks to the Zimbabwe-Sadc bridge of diplomacy. One of the issues that we have in Africa is this thing that presidents like HH or others who lean towards doing more business or politics with the Western world, Western countries, are puppets. You've heard that expression, I know. You're a political historian.
Oh, yeah.
And so if you decide to lean with China, Russia, and all these other countries, you are not a puppet.
Yeah, that calls for scrutiny of the word puppet itself. Because
so where do you think, as a political historian, where do you think that is stemming from? What actually is the underlying issue on that matter?
The underlying issue is that we are caught up in these proxy wars that are being fought on an international scale by the Western world and the Eastern Bloc. And this has always been the case ever since the start of the Cold War, ever since the end of the Second World War. Because I want you to remember that this thing has a history. You asked me to give this answer from a historical perspective.
Yes.
So this thing has a history. If you look at it, when African countries were fighting for their own liberation, they were fighting against their colonizer. Who was their colonizer? Is the Western world, is Britain. They are fighting against Britain, they are fighting against France. And most of these African countries, especially those that waged protracted liberation wars, where did they get the support to fight and drive out their colonizer from the West? They got that support from the communist Eastern Bloc. They got their support and training from Russia. They got it from China. In some cases, they got it from Cuba. More importantly, they got it from Russia and they got it from China. So this is how they established a working relationship with the Eastern Bloc. Right at the point of decolonization phase, decolonization wars. And that relationship remained intact, especially with the ruling parties that then assumed power right immediately after the attainment of independence. That's why you see that relationship is very working in the context of ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe. That relationship is working in terms of the connections between Frelimo and the Eastern world, in Frelimo from Mozambique. That is why you see the ANC, it also still holds on to the very same values of the Eastern Bloc. It's actually part of BRICS. as we speak right now.
Yeah,
So that is the history behind the divisions that are on the African continent ideologically. So whenever somebody else comes with policies that sort of lean towards the East or towards the former colonizer, he's then considered a puppet because he believes in a different kind of ideology. But the point is not to say we should be either for the East or for the West.
The West.
We're not supposed to be caught up in that kind of proxy war. We are actually supposed to stand as Africans and be confident in our own ideas, in solving our own problems and applying our own solutions to our very own problems. We mustn't be caught up with in that.
And to that point, as we conclude this conversation, to that point, shouldn't, in spite of all the dictatorial tendencies, the hardships that our African political leaders create, shouldn't, what do you call it? Shouldn't our political leaders realize that it's not about me getting into state house, whatever it is, or becoming president? You are 10 candidates, Anotida, in Zimbabwe. 10 candidates. And I'm saying to myself, guys, a friend of mine did the simple math, okay? A friend of mine did the simple math. Let me show you something here. I hope I'm able to bring this up. A friend of mine did the simple math, all right? Let's look at this. Just take a look at that, okay? For a minute, let's remove. You see all those political candidates there?
Yeah.
If you add up all these votes, this other guy, that's 1.9 versus 2.3. Not a very huge margin.
Yeah.
If you add up all those, what do you call it, votes that those guys got, you beat what's you call it? You beat the incumbent.
Oh yes, that's true. That's true.
So let's talk about our African politics. Shouldn't we get to that point where we move away from me and making it about the people? Because that's basically what our political leaders tend to show. Because these guys knew they didn't have a chance. Okay, why not? What's the issue with this? The only way you're going to beat him is to form a coalition or an alliance
and be united. That's the point. Yeah. So this, when you showed me these figures, I wasn't surprised because these are the same figures that we saw in Nigeria last year. When is it like in February this year when
Nigerian election?
Yeah,
there you go.
Nigerian elections, which Bola Tinubu won. The opposition was divided and it took so many votes between themselves. If they add up the figures of the opposition on one candidate and compile them so that one candidate can get, they would have won the election. It's the same thing that we see in Zimbabwe. So now, whether those figures are cooked up by the Electoral Commission or not, let us actually come to the point where we discuss to say, why have 11 candidates in the first place?
Exactly.
Yes, it's good to have a multi-party democracy because, you know, it's what gives us credibility that the space is open for anyone to contest and all that. Yes, that's okay. But it also shows us how broken we are as a people. And not just at the top.
It also shows us how broken we are as a people. And Otida, you know that 10 of you candidates are taking away from beating this person. Whoever it is, whether you want to beat HH, whether you want to beat the Nigerian president, or, you know that if there are 12 of you on the ballot, it's not happening.
Yeah. That is true. That is very true. And that's a broken society, you see. So it's broken not just at the top. The problem is not just at the point where we say presidents, everyone wants to be presidents and they are not agreeing, and it's just a problem with people, the elites at the top who mostly, in most cases, contest to be presidents. There is a statement that was made by a sociologist, Herbert Spencer, That goes like, leaders are a product of the society which they come from.
There you go.
And that's a very true point. Because that division that you see up top right there, it's not a division that just
is happening there.
It's not just happening there. It's not by coincidence up on the top. That's the division that is at the very bottom that we see even in churches today. Right now, if you go into Zambia, if you go to Zimbabwe, if you just see one church that is started by a prophet, today it starts as Victory Life Ministries. Tomorrow it's 5 churches. To the other day it's 10 churches. It splits all over. And this is in the church. There is a church called the Apostolic Faith Mission in Zimbabwe. Right now in Zimbabwe today. It has given birth to almost every single church in Zimbabwe right now as I speak. That's the church that has given birth to every single
church
that is in the country.
And speaking of the church, you see how politically entangled and divided the church has become.
And remember, it's
you and I in the United States. You know what is going on.
Yeah.
It's not just Africa when it comes to the church. So then back to our point of so many candidates. Okay. And this is to the political leaders, our political leaders in Zambia, and all these, church has failed and all these things. And you think all 12, 13 of you are going to beat him when there's 13 of you? It's not happening. I'm just going to tell you right here and now. He wins 2026 if you don't work together. I'm not advocating that HH is thrown out of power, but I'm just trying to say, as long as we continue with these selfish tendencies, you are not going anywhere. That's my point, Anotida. Because I'm saying to myself, okay, you see, President of Zimbabwe, the thing is this. All these things that were said about SADC, Anotida, all the reports that were given, you mentioned 2 million people didn't vote and all these other things, okay? In Zambia, we had a similar situation. Why don't you give these guys a shock of their lives when they have printed 500,000 extra ballot papers to rig the elections? They beat them by 2 million. You saw what happened in Zambia. You know what I'm talking about? So that even if they throw in their rigged papers, they still won't solve the problem because you have voted en masse. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Anyway. Tafwaza says, from the ZANU-PF perspective, the opposition was given space to campaign. For example, they were given space to advertise on radio stations, even on ZBC News. You could view coverage of CCC, Nelson Chamisa campaigns. Even some of their billboards were on display throughout the country. That's what Mr. Shoko is saying, spokesperson for ZANU-PF. Okay, my friend, you've helped me and all of us watching. I believe you've helped us understand the background purpose and of the electoral observer missions. We've spoken of quite a number of things. The script and the conversation went even the direction you and I didn't plan, but it's all good. To our listeners, Mr. Tafwaza Shoko, the ZANU-PF political advisor, is not able to connect. Your last words, my brother, before we go.
Well, I don't have much. We wish to see the present government act in the best interest of Zimbabweans, because what we can't run away from now is that they are the ones that are in power, and they are going to be in there for the next 5 years. I wrote a letter to the president 2 days ago. So it's going to be published in the Daily Maverick sometime next week. So I gave him what I would want to term the 10 commandments that he's supposed to follow so that Vision 2030 can be achieved. The Lord didn't reveal them to me himself. but they are just a reflection of what
I like that, trying to make it clear that you are not a prophet, right?
Oh yes, that's the thing. But we continue to fight for a better Zimbabwe. We will be supportive to the present government in ways we can, because after all, Zimbabwe is for all of us.
That's right.
So that's the most important thing. We might have political differences, ideologically we might not align, but at the end of the day, what we want is a better Zimbabwe.
That's
so
right.
That there's no debate to better Zimbabwe.
No, there's no debate to a better Africa. There's no debate to a better Zambia, better South Africa, better Tunisia, better Nigeria, better everything. That's what we want. Okay?
That's exactly the point.
Yeah. And when you come into our countries to observe elections, don't give us your opinion. Just let us do our own, because we cannot observe your elections. So I'm not of this idea. I'm just making it clear here. Not me and the observer, whatever, especially the Western things. No, I don't mind SADC going into South Africa or whatever, but can they come into America? If they can't come into America, then let it end there. Thank you, my brother. Wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Anotida Chikumbu. He's a PhD student at University of Massachusetts Amherst, and is also a political historian. Anotida writes quite a bit. Just search for his name on Google, and a lot of things are going to come up. Thanks, Anotida.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mr. Nkam.
You're welcome. It was PT, Mr. Shoko, the ZANU-PF spokesperson, wasn't able to connect. Everything did work out well when we were testing before the show, but things do happen, and that is the nature of things. Thanks, everybody. Join us next week for another interesting discussion.
The Organization of Zambians Abroad invites you to attend the Oza Zambia Independence event on Saturday, 28th of October, 2023 at Rivers Casino, 3000 South River Road, Des Plaines, Illinois 60018 in the greater metropolis of Chicago. This will take place from 7 p.m. to 2 a.m. Tickets are going at $120 online, featuring free dinner and cash bar. For more info, call Siddiq Gello on 678-851-6601. Let's get together and party.
Zambia Blog Talk Radio.